Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. And we're back in Calloway County with trucking accident attorney Jeff Roberts. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Jim. How are you?
Buddy, I'm doing well. You showed me a photo before we started this episode, and we knew we were going to talk about trucking accidents today. But oh my gosh, and we'll get into it. In fact, if you're pulling this podcast up on Jeff's website, you'll see the photo. Just unbelievable. But Jeff, let's jump into this. You've handled motor vehicle accidents, you've handled trucking accidents for over 33 years now.
I have. I've been doing this for over 33 years at this point in time, and don't plan on stopping anytime soon. So,
wow, and so I would think this is going to be so much more complicated than a car accident. You know, where you might have either on a county road here, or you might have a city road, you get a fender bender. When you have a tractor trailer involved, just the sheer mass of that tractor trailer, the damage is going to be, I would think, typically a lot more catastrophic.
Oh, absolutely. The injuries with semi-truck wrecks are usually much more severe than they are with just regular passenger vehicles going at the same rate of speed. Obviously from that standpoint, just because there's more mass, more force with that semi-truck in that regard. And they are more complicated cases to pursue as a general rule because you have so many more regulations involved in these.
This is a federal issue now, right?
If they travel across state lines, then they got to comply with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act there, and most do. It's rare that you'll have somebody that doesn't cross, that doesn't, and if they're over certain weights, they still have to comply. So most trucking cases, you've got somebody who's got to comply with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act, and it's got certain requirements that it places on the driver, on the company, and things of that nature. So there's a lot of regulations that come into play in these that just aren't really there as much in a two passenger vehicles that collide. You don't have all of those type of things that come into play there. Now, to some extent it can. There's no regulation on the length of time that you can drive a passenger vehicle for personal purposes. If you're doing it for pay, then you still got to comply. But so someone who drives from, if they're were on vacation in the Keys and they're driving home, and they've been driving for 15 hours, they haven't broken any laws, they haven't broken any regulations, but that is a factor that comes into play, or can come into play, on whether that played a factor in causing the wreck, that they were tired and they should not have been still driving after driving that length of time. In a semi-truck driver that does that, they have violated the law, and then you've got a situation where it very well may be negligence per se. It is negligence
either they did it or they didn't, right? There's no
Yeah.
interpretation here.
Correct. So you've got those type of situations. So some of the same factors can come into play, but with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act, you've got a lot of things that you've got to look at in these regards. So.
And that's always amazed me about this, is that you've got to either be up on these or have the experience, so you know where to look and which of these regulations may or may not occur in that particular situation. I mean, it's complex because, again, they're overlapping. You probably still have state issues. You probably still have other factors that come into play, and then on top of that, now you've got this other big rule book, if you will, that's hanging out there that you've got to know.
Well, that's true, and that's one thing that the attorneys can know and research and look at the law. But I can know the truck company violated the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act. I can get the evidence to establish that. I can't testify to that. So one of
the
things,
attorney,
the attorney cannot. So one of the things that you need to do, in my opinion, in these cases, is to get an accident reconstructionist or another expert, depending on what is needed in the case, but someone who's familiar with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act and can go in and say, and look at the vehicle and say, yeah, it violated this standard, this standard, this standard, et cetera. That can get up in front of a jury and say that. And that's one of the things, one of the other complicating factors in these cases is frequently with semi trucks, especially big carriers, they have basically kind of an emergency response team that will mobilize to go to accident sites to help try to minimize or find ways to minimize liability in these cases. So they may have somebody, an accident reconstructionist, on the scene within 24 hours or even less time than that.
And your prospective client probably hadn't even made contact with an attorney yet because maybe they're banged up enough.
They're still in the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. And so what happens, though? Why is it so important to get out there that quickly? And why is it a risk if you're not out there somewhat quicker?
Well, a few things. One is it's easier to tell fresh marks than it is marks that have been there for months. So it's easier to realize which marks are fresh marks from that and to document those marks. And, there could be multiple marks, and you would hope that the expert would document every one of them and photograph every one of them. But if some marks are favorable to the trucking company that's paying them and some marks are favorable to the injured party, they may not document the marks that are favorable to the injured party.
Accidentally on purpose.
Yeah. Hopefully the police have done that, and some police accident reconstructionists are extremely good at what they do, and do a really good job of documenting. Some, even if there's not a death involved in it, but it's a serious injury, and they will do that. And so that will help out if you've got those photos and all of that.
And when we're talking about the mark, we're talking about skid marks, we're talking about gouges in the roadway, probably scrape marks, things like that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Those are exactly where.
And some of that can erode over time, right? So, I mean, weather just can erase them more or less.
Well, it can erode over time. It will fade over time. Mm-hmm. Hard to tell what's fresh versus what may have already been there.
Or what came after.
Or what came after from that standpoint. And frankly, I've been involved in one case that they come to me. It was quite a ways after the accident, about a year after the accident when they come to me. And I contacted, because there was some question as to what happened and who was where. And so I had accident reconstructionists that I used go to the scene and look at it. And he called me up and said, I can't help you. And I said, what's going on? And he said, they've repaved.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He said, this road has been repaved in this area. And said, there's no gouge marks here anymore. It's been repaved within the last month or so. He said, so, I couldn't, he looked at the police report and the photos and was able to give me some information, but he wasn't able to go to the scene and document anything at that point.
Yeah, he could maybe even the black box, maybe do some analysis there.
Yeah, the black box already gone at that point.
But so much of that forensic evidence is just lost at that point.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, that's it. And that's the other thing you can get, as far as damage on vehicles, you see what's fresh damage versus what's been there before. And so you can, if it's damage that was there before, you may see rust and things of that nature. But if it's 5 months later before I get involved, then the damage from this wreck is going to be rusted. If it's been sitting out in a tow lot or yard or something of that nature. So getting someone there early on can make a big difference in understanding everything that took place and being able to present that to a jury if you have to go to the jury, or presenting it to the insurance company to get a fair settlement for your case.
That makes sense. Well, Jeff, we've kind of set the table for some of the factors here. Let's dive into some serious issues right now. As springtime is really unfolding, road construction season is back upon us. So, I mean,
Yes.
that's something that we're having to contend with.
Oh, yeah, it is. And you're going to see, heavy equipment out on the road getting to the road construction sites, the equipment that they use in that, but also you're going to see a lot more dump trucks, asphalt, hauling asphalt, et cetera, for these road constructions. And those are, they can be a huge hazard with any semi, any big truck. The weight that they have, and I said earlier, if you have a wreck with them at the same speeds, you've got much more mass, so you've got a lot more force involved. It takes a lot longer for them to slow down. And so one thing, and I think I've mentioned this before, is to make sure you give plenty of leeway between you and a semi. If you're changing lanes in front of a semi, don't pull over right in front of him as soon as your rear bumper clears his front bumper. Get far enough ahead and then get back over in that regard, because if something runs out in front of you and you got to hit the brakes quickly, and you just got back over in front of him, he's not going to stop as fast as the truck driver is not going to stop as fast as you're going to stop in the passenger vehicle.
It astonishes me the more I drive these roadways here in Kentucky, and it's other states as well, but especially here in Kentucky, I see passenger vehicles merging quickly in front of a semi and then coming to an abrupt stop. And I'm thinking, what was your thought process there, if you had one at all? Because, right. I mean, you just put yourself in a very risky situation, because as you said, it's going to take that trucker a lot longer to stop that vehicle than you and your little, two-seater or whatever. It astonishes me every time I see it.
Yeah. And I agree, and I see the same thing, and I don't understand it at all. When I'm driving down the interstate, and if there's a semi that I've gone around, I've passed, I get plenty of clearance before I get back over. And if I know I've got an exit coming up within the next mile to 2 miles, I'm not passing the semi. I'm just going to slow down and stay behind the semi until I got to get off. It's, I don't want somebody to pass me and then all of a sudden slow down to get off and cause me to hit my brakes. And I don't want to do that to other drivers, especially not semi-drivers who are out there trying to make a living. That's just bad manners, in my opinion, to do that. But you've got to pay attention to those. And I've seen them come out, seems to me one of the worst that I see it at. I go, as we've talked about before, I handle cases all over the state, and I travel to various places in the state, Frankfort, Louisville, Lexington, frequently, and where you get off the West Kentucky Parkway onto I-65 there at Elizabethtown, and you got that cloverleaf where you get on, and then you come there, and 65 is just, there's a ton of semis that's traveling that road, and I've seen people just pull right out, not going as fast as the semi that's going down the interstate, and just pull right out in front of them.
I don't understand it.
And the semi have to hit its brakes hard and maybe go into the next lane if it's open from that, because the person didn't speed up to get up in front of them or just slow down more and get in behind them. It's just,
I mean, that's we've talked, and I really want to talk about this issue with hills in particular, because again, large trucks tend to decelerate as they're trying to make it up the hill.
Correct.
And they may accelerate going down the hill. It's just physics. But to your point, I've run that loop. In fact, I'm going to run that loop later on today. And I'm amazed that people don't think, hey, I need to be up at highway speed before I merge onto the highway. That's why you've got that long runway there.
Right.
Is what I call it, just so you can kind of get up to speed. And it's, people that are just putzing around, I'm like, you're going to get yourself into bad trouble.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you may not be around to see how it turns out.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing about it. I don't want to be glib about that, but it's risky.
It is. And, I represent people who've been injured in wrecks when it's not their fault, or they're not solely to blame, but usually it's not their fault. And that is, but you've got some situations where people do things that kind of lead to what happens, and unfortunately that's it. And that you not only affect yourself, but you affect everybody else involved in that wreck and everybody who comes up on that wreck.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
Jeff, we've done episodes on traffic fatalities, and unfortunately, you've handled a number of those, and that's got to be a very emotionally heart-wrenching type of case to take on.
it is. There are very difficult cases from a personal standpoint in dealing with that. I was actually preparing for something else not too long ago and was looking into the different stresses of practicing law, especially personal injury law. And one of the things that I had never even thought about it, but it says one of the things that personal injury attorneys do is secondary trauma. They're not in the trauma itself, but they're seeing all the pictures and all of that. Obviously, nowhere near as traumatic as being involved in it, but when you see that over and over and over again, it can weigh on you from that standpoint. So.
Man, oh man. Yeah, and again, some of it just comes down to people not paying attention, and other times it just you got to have some common sense when you get out there. So let me come back to this. When you're going up and down hills with tractor trailers, I think that's a good time just to give them plenty of extra room and just assume, look, I may be able to accelerate because I'm in a smaller car and pass them a motorcycle. If you've ever been passed by a motorcycle, you know that. I mean, they're lighter, they're faster, they're quicker, a little bit more nimble. Okay, that makes sense. You're kind of the same way with the tractor trailer, so don't crowd them. They're doing the best they can, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you give them plenty of room when they're going up a hill. Expect them to slow down some. When they're going down a hill, they're probably going to speed up some. And just like a motorcycle can accelerate faster than most passenger vehicles can accelerate, a passenger car can accelerate faster than a semi can accelerate. So if you've got if you've got a semi coming up on you from the rear end who's coming down and coming up fast, you can accelerate a little bit from that standpoint. Now, obviously, you don't need to accelerate up to 90 mile an hour, but and that's something semi drivers have to keep. They need to be keeping an eye out, checking all their mirrors, everything to make sure everything is safe whenever they maneuver their vehicle. And passenger drivers need to do that. Especially, you need to do it at all times, but especially when you're dealing with a semi. Keep if you got a semi behind you, keep an eye out. You got a semi ahead of you, keep an eye out on that. Or if he's on your left or on your right, you need to keep an eye out because that can be, there's issues coming in. If you've got one semi that's trying to merge over, and there's a semi coming into the interstate on the 2-lane, and you've got a semi that they're going to be meeting, and he's trying to get over to the left lane so he can let the other semi in. If you're running where you're eye to eye with him, give it a little bit of gas and get out of his way so he can get over. And if you're at his rear bumper, slow down a little bit and let him get over. Just sharing the highway.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a hard enough job, and the average person out there driving probably is not thinking about, what all's going on around them. They're lost in their own thoughts or listening to the radio or paying attention to the kids or having a great conversation.
Right.
And to a point, you can understand that. But again, the risks, if you're driving around or near a tractor trailer, are just, they're so heightened, and we got to pay attention. You and I talked about beginning, actually, as we were prepping for this, we're talking about just neither of us like to drive beside a tractor trailer, and I do that as a rule. I like to accelerate and get the heck out of the way.
Same. I try to get out of the way, and one of the things we talked about was the one that I really hate to be beside, and that's log trucks. We have a lot of log trucks in this area. I don't want to be behind them. I don't want to be beside them. If there's a log truck in front of me, I'm usually, if I got the chance to get around them, I'm getting around them because I don't. It just. And thankfully, I've never seen one actually lose a log. The photo that you talked about.
Yep.
That I did see. Luckily, the driver of the semi saw it, or the log truck saw it, but it was, as if viewers see or listeners see the photo. I mean, the log, a big log, was sticking out from the side of the truck. It had come loose from in between the pillars, and he got it pulled over, got it into a parking lot before it fell off. But that log was going to be coming off
Yeah.
if he kept on going down the highway.
Oh, as soon as I saw that, I said, "That's a loose tooth." I mean, if you've ever had a little kid with a loose tooth, that was one. Yeah, because it looked like it was a shortcut log, so it kind of came in between the stays, if you will. And
Yeah.
boy, it wouldn't have taken much longer for that thing to just pop out of there.
Yeah. Luckily, the driver
Wow.
was keeping an eye on his mirror and
Yeah.
saw that and got pulled over. I say that I don't know if how he found out about it, but I assume
At that
that's
point,
what
he
it
was off the road, and the log was still on the truck. So.
He was off the road in the parking lot, stopped completely, and I'm assuming stayed stopped until he was able to get that issue addressed from there. But that photo is reason number one. I don't like to be anywhere near log trucks. I'm just worried about something like that happening. And I know that I'm going to pass away at some point in time in my life. I just don't want it to be. He got crushed by logs that fell off a log truck.
Exactly. Well, the technology inside the cab of a typical tractor trailer is pretty advanced these days. I mean,
Yes.
they kind of understand. They've got sensors and things. They kind of know if you're in that blind spot more or less. But I would think some of these trucks may not have that up to date technology, especially if it's just a haul truck or a construction truck of some sort.
Yeah, the newer trucks have a great deal of technology to help with the same as passenger cars, newer passenger cars.
Yeah.
You have the lane departure warnings. You've got people in your blind spot warnings, blind spot monitors, and keep distance from keep you a safe distance from the car in front of you. The automatic braking, and so passenger cars have a lot of safety equipment. Trucks have a lot of safety equipment now in that regard, and that can help, but not all trucks on the highway have that. You've got semis on the highway that's got a lot of years on them, and they're not going to have all that new equipment on them now. Over time, more and more will have that, it's I've talked a lot about other drivers around semis, but the semi drivers got to be diligent in keeping an eye out, because your blind spot monitor may let you know somebody's there, but if you don't pay attention to it, doesn't help.
Right. Well, that's a good point.
Yeah, and so if you're not looking and before you make that turn and you don't see that monitor going off, then you're going to pull. Yeah.
Well, you talked about the person driving up from the Florida Keys coming back from vacation. Maybe it was driven 15 hours, and you get a little fatigued at some point.
Exactly.
It's more dangerous when the truck driver's been on the road.
Right.
Even if he's within those windows, some days you're just tired.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially if the weather's been complicated or traffic's been bad, you just get mentally fatigued, and now you've got this 18-wheeler that you're driving.
And I don't know how everybody else is, but occasionally I have a real bad night's sleep where I don't get hardly any sleep.
Yeah. And
I'm much tireder the next day, and if I'm on a long drive, that can be very difficult. You've got to, and that's something that, I don't go on long drives, daily like semi-truck drivers do.
Right.
And so if they have a bad night's sleep and then get back behind that wheel, after you drive 4 or 5 hours, you may be getting a little bit tired. And so you've got to be careful. You've got to make sure, and the best thing is to just be very safety conscious for both the semi-driver and the other vehicles on the roadway. I'm 100% convinced none of the semi-drivers out there are wanting to be involved in a wreck. They don't want to cause a wreck. They don't want any part of a wreck from that standpoint. And obviously, no driver wants to cause a wreck. From that standpoint, most of them trying to do what they're just trying to make a living and take care of their family and keep the products on the shelves. And so they're, but sometimes we're negligent.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't do what we should do.
Jeff, just as we wrap up the episode here, we're just got a couple minutes left. I want to ask you something. A lot of times you think, well, the truck driver caused the accident, the truck driver did this, whatever. Kentucky has something called pure comparative fault.
Correct.
And that can come into play big time here.
It can. Pure comparative fault is, basically says you fix what you break.
Okay.
That's the easiest way to say. So if you're in a wreck, and the jury can apportion fault among different parties, and so if you're in a wreck, the jury can say you're 40% at fault in causing this wreck, and you pay 40% of the injured party's damages. Or if you're the injured party, then you don't get 40% of your damages.
Because it's 40% your fault.
Yeah, it's
if
40%
that's how
your
the
fault.
jury's
Yes,
looking at it.
if the defendant is 10% at fault, they pay 10% of the damages. If they're found to be 90% at fault, they pay 90%. If they're 100%, they pay 100%. And so up to policy limits. Yeah. So you've got that's pure comparative, which is the fairest system that you can have, in my opinion. Nobody's been able to convince me or even try to make an argument that it's fair to do something different than pure comparative. What you break, you fix.
So again, as you're driving this summer around tractor trailers, think about that. Because, again, just because they hit you doesn't mean you're going to get off scot-free. One, the damages and the medical experience that you're going to probably incur, and I mean going through the healing process and surgeries and everything, it's not going to be worth proving the fact that you were right. It's not going to be worth it. But if the jury ultimately says, well, you know what, you contributed to this accident, that's also going to make it much more difficult for you to fully recover financially.
To fully recover, but also you have to, the other side of that is, even if you think you are partially at fault in causing the accident, doesn't mean that you can't pursue a claim.
Yeah.
So even if you think, okay, I didn't give enough clearance here.
Didn't use my signal.
Something like that, or I was speeding a little bit. That doesn't mean that you don't have a claim to pursue. There can be more than one party at fault in causing a wreck, and if so, then you pay the percentage of fault you are, or you don't recover the percentage of fault, but the other driver pays the percentage of fault they caused in that regard. So that's the, and that's a fair system. To me it is anyway. So
that makes sense. Jeff, we started out in the first segment of the podcast today talking about the fact that you've handled cases across the state. You, however, have two primary offices. You've got an office here in Calloway County in Murray. That's the main office, but you've got a secondary office up in Christian County in Hopkinsville. Right. And so, but you still can handle a case all the way across. You could take a case from Prestonsburg.
Yes. Yeah, I can handle a case anywhere in Kentucky. I'm licensed by in the state of Kentucky to practice in all of the counties, 120 counties, if I recall correctly. But I only have one number. I think it's just easier to have one number, and my staff can, when you call the office, you'll get a live person 90% of the time, answer during business hours. And the number is 270-753-0053. If I happen to be at the Hopkinsville office, they can get in touch with me and let me know you've called. But just having that one number makes sure everything is documented and everything's taken care of.
That makes sense. And if you want additional information, you can always go to jeffrobertslaw.com. It's a good website. We've got all of these podcasts up there under the media section. And by the way, if you want to check out that photo we've talked about multiple times, you're going to see it. Look for episode 134. And as soon as you see it, just thank yourself or thank whomever that you weren't the one riding beside this truck, because that would have been a scary, scary day.
If I had been beside the truck and saw that would have been a very scary day. I think I would have probably hit my brakes as hard as I've ever hit my brakes in that regard. I'm very thankful that the driver found out about it in time and got pulled off, because that was going through that was pulled off here in Murray, just off of the major 4-lane road that goes through the middle of Murray, Highway 641, and that road it was in the city limits is where I saw that at. Wow. So it would have been he was traveling down a high traffic area when that happened.
That would have been multiple vehicles.
It would have been multiple and probably some very, very serious injuries.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, again, angels around us some days. So, Jeff, I appreciate your time, guy. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.